In the 1950s, the famous newsreel company Pathé produced a major historical documentary series for British television. Made by the award-winning producer Peter Bayliss and narrated by an illustrious lineup of celebrated actors, Time to Remember chronicled the social, cultural and political forces that shaped the first half of the 20th century. Bayliss made several programs featuring Prohibition-era America. The story of the associated crime wave on the other side of the Atlantic offers an evocative picture of an extraordinary time.
Things, faces, friends, places, years and moments half forgotten, laughs, fears, songs and tears, memories are made of this.
America in the 30s, the Depression era, the longest, most widespread economic slump of the 20th century. It was also the time of Prohibition, when ridding the country of the demon drink was seen as the only way of preserving Christianity and the good souls of America. But while Prohibition was successful in reducing the amount of alcohol being consumed, it spawned an epidemic of crime and civil unrest on an unprecedented scale. News agencies couldn't get enough of the real-life crime stories and fed the public fascination for all the gory details with page after page, reel upon reel of the gun battles, arrests and trials. Whether on the street or in the courthouse, the news camera was often there, and so criminals became celebrities. Al Capone, Lester Babyface Nelson, and Jack Legs Diamond, names familiar to us even now, and high-profile cases, such as the Lindbergh trial, were played out in the full glare of publicity.
Did you lie to him or did you tell him the truth? I said nothing. You lied, didn't you?
Fueled by economic desperation, criminals turned the streets of American cities into violent battlegrounds, where the forces of crime, justice, and media collided.
The winds that blew in the 30s in the United States were winds to be remembered and then forgotten hurriedly. Bowling through the dust bowls of the Middle West, scourging from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The winds of the Depression, as deep as it went, and it went deep. Days of the bonus army camping on Washington's doorstep, demanding decent treatment. Decent treatment meaning a living wage instead of an existence. President Hoover had the unenviable task of leading the nation's administration. We all know better now. So go ahead, cast the first rock. At heart, the United States was as strong as now. Like now, a country of many races, colors, and religions, yet together making one people. A good people, but a people suffering as though from the plague. When you're down, what better than a drink? But they, meaning the law, wouldn't allow you a drink. Haven't you heard of Prohibition? But when the people want something, they generally get it, especially when the boys were so ready to supply it.
There was no shortage of bootleggers to quench America's thirst during those long, dry years which kept the US Coastguard very busy. One enterprising rum runner, Captain William McCoy, yes, he of the real McCoy, so named because unlike all the rest he never watered down his booze, would bring the goods to just outside of US territorial waters and then have smaller boats take the cargo to shore, vessels that could easily outrun the Coast Guard ships. His was a sophisticated operation, and over 4 years he would run 175,000 cases of illicit liquor. Prohibition may have made the consumption of alcohol illegal, but the work of the bootleggers led to a surge in the number of speakeasies, particularly in the cities of New York and Chicago, where the booze flowed almost as freely as ever. But it wasn't all drinking and frivolity. Organized crime thrived during this period, and the perpetrators weren't afraid to use violence to get what they wanted. The gun was the weapon of choice, and the most popular was the Tommy gun. Initially designed for soldiers in the trenches during the First World War, its ease of use made it popular among both criminals and police during Prohibition.
If they were rough with each other, it was generally good riddance. But getting rough with the law and decent citizens, that was something else. They sure were a prize bunch. The baby faces, the pretty boy Floyds, the Schultzes, and the O'Banions. Only their mothers ever had real affection for them. Their defense, the bribe, the mouthpiece, the slick alibi, with a laugh and a smile and a song. Who could take to heart such endearing characters as Jack Legs Diamond?
The most notorious criminals of the time may not have been loved, but to many they were latter-day folk heroes whose exploits were followed eagerly in the press. Diamond, also known as Gentleman Jack or the Clay Pigeon, was one of those ruthless yet charismatic mobsters. He survived 4 attempts on his life and 2 kidnap trials before hitmen put 3 well-placed bullets to the back of his head. But for some, it was the law that brought their criminal careers to an end.
Watch this character. Press interviewed while awaiting the last walk to the electric chair. Note the ego, the pride, the pretended artistic temperament. In this face, can you see any regrets?
All right, that's enough.
The chair's enough without this, he says, as though he went to the chair every other week.
The chair's enough without this, isn't it?
Besides, the public has other attractions, like Dillinger.
John Herbert Dillinger epitomized the Depression-era gangster. More mythologized by the public than reviled, he has been immortalized in popular culture as the Robin Hood of the American underworld. In truth, he was a hard-wired murderer and bank robber who wasn't afraid to use deadly force against the law.
Escaping from Crown Point, he was trapped in St. Paul by police. Shooting his way out, Dillinger streaks back to Chicago, then to Warsaw, where he robbed the police station of guns, then to his home in Mooresville. Then he headed north to Sault Ste. Marie. Beset by the law again, Eagle River, to Mercer, on to St. Paul in another gun battle. Last seen toward Chicago. Such was Dillinger. Yet all the while, the world changes. Soon, by and large, the nation got bored with the boys. And no one got more bored than President Hoover, especially as he couldn't stir from the White House without an army of bodyguards. For by now, the gangsters' activities had spread from drink to 1,000 other profitable fields, from prostitution to the numbers game. The president had one bête noire in particular. This guy, he says, has got to be put away. This guy was the gentleman known as Al Scarface Capone. Here seen watching one of his races, which was probably fixed anyway. Hoover persevered. And it was the greatest surprise of the century when Gentle Al got put away for 11 years for not paying his income tax. To young hero worshippers, one hero lost. Once the big guy had gone into stir, the gangster empire began to crumble. And week by week saw more faces going through the routine preparatory to a long stay in the pen. Yes, ladies too. But though gang power might wane, there were still plenty of small-time operators to make a living in the only way they knew how, illegally. A wave of kidnapping. Selecting a body well-heeled or with wealthy kin, the abductors were spirited away into hiding until they could, with the aid of ransom notes or threats, extract payment according to their assessment of the victim's skin. The racket became a national pest. On this boat, sought out by police launches, a small girl was kept prisoner. In this case, the affair ended happily. Or should we say, unhappily for the boys. But then some guys never get the breaks.
The most high-profile crime of the era wasn't committed by organized criminals. The kidnapping of the baby of pioneer aviators Charles and Anne Lindbergh became known as the crime of the century. The story began on March the 1st, 1932.
An open window, a ladder, and the Lindbergh boy is gone. A police force, overwhelmed by the enormity of the crime and the attention it attracts, stumbles forward and does its best. But its best doesn't produce the Lindbergh baby. One of the greatest and most extensive searches in history combs the area around the Lindbergh home. The simple wood-built house becomes the center of the world. Fame is guaranteed by ordering a coffee in Hopewell, New Jersey. All who deal in the written or spoken word communicate with everywhere from Hopewell. The latest goes out from coast to coast.
Hello, everybody. We're speaking to you now from the general store in Hopewell, New Jersey, the improvised press headquarters during the Lindbergh case. We have here a flash which reads as follows. If the kidnappers of our child are unwilling to deal directly, we fully authorize Salvi Spitali and Irving Bitts to act as our go-betweens. We will also follow any other method suggested by the kidnappers that we can be sure will bring the return of our child. This message is signed Charles A. and Anne Lindbergh.
In crowded Hopewell, the press clusters around Dr. Condon, known as Japsy, the man who has somehow infiltrated so far as to be throwing ransom money over cemetery walls to a character known to Japsy as John. Then, amid all the frustrations of the search, from jail comes the honey-sweet voice of reason. Let me out of this, says Al Capone, and the baby will be recovered. Trust honest Al. But the state, jealous of its possession of such a distinguished guest, refused to talk business.
Those interested in law enforcement throughout this nation are assured that this particular menace to society will never be liberated until he shall have served the sentence of imprisonment which has been imposed upon him.
As the days pass for restless America, the unsolved case slips into that thing in the papers that's been there for so long. The public, lacking the patience of the law, becomes a mite tired of the affair.
Then on May the 12th, 1932, more than 2 months after he had gone missing,
In the darkness not more than 5 miles from Hopewell, men have found the body of the Lindbergh baby.
the kidnapping had become a murder investigation, and it took police a further 30 months to arrest a suspect.
Then the continent is electrified by a sudden announcement on the Lindbergh mystery from a police commissioner.
We have in custody the man who received the ransom money. His name is Bruno Richard Hauptmann, 1279 East 222nd Street in the borough of the Bronx in the city of New York. He came to this country as a stowaway 11 years ago. He is an alien unlawfully in the country.
Will this solve the Lindbergh kidnapping?
In the opinion of all three of us, yes.
1279 East 222nd Street, the Bronx, in the state of New York. Here lived the suspect. In his rented garage across the street, they found $13,750 in bills whose serial numbers checked with the notes planted by the law in various ransom payments. It was the passing of one of these notes to a gas station attendant that led to the arrest. The attendant wrote the car number on the face of the bill, which eventually proved to be a ransom note. Following up, the police found the car, stolen at Hopewell the day before the kidnapping. The license had been issued to one Bruno Richard Hauptmann. A man whose neat records of his savings and expenses showed that while in America he had spent $49,950 more than he had earned. $49,950.44. And this, as was pointed out, was something. The lady of the house was also questioned.
When did you first see the money, Mrs. Hauptmann?
I saw the money the first time when the detective took me down to the garage.
Do you think your husband is guilty of kidnapping the Lindbergh baby?
I'm absolutely sure my husband had nothing to do with the Lindbergh kidnapping case.
Hauptmann appealed to be released on bail, but when he was brought before the judge, such was the nature of his crime, there was little hope. Hauptmann, unlike the big boys, had no resources and no powerful friends. In any case, the state was in no mood to listen to a mouthpiece or to be lenient. So into jail he went. Behind the bars, while the prosecution went about methodically stacking and compiling its evidence. Even the telltale garage came down, in case the timber could yield a fact.
All manner of persons having business to do with this court to come, please.
So began at Flemington, New Jersey, the trial of the crime of the century. Among those present, Anne Lindbergh, Colonel Lindbergh, parents of a victim now 2 years dead. Betty Gow, the baby's nurse. Mrs. Hauptmann, and the star of the show, her nervous husband, Bruno Richard.
Around 700 journalists descended on Flemington, New Jersey for the trial.
The case opens with routine statements, time, place, and date of the crime. Evidence from Colonel Lindbergh. Formal identifications, etc., from Anne Lindbergh. Filling in of details by the nurse, Betty Gow. Then, a pathetic array of articles appears. The clothing worn by baby Lindbergh on the night of his kidnapping. A sleeping suit, which the state contends was the one turned over by Hauptmann in return for the ransom. A thumb guard from the baby's suit. Always, Hauptmann is the attraction. A subject for the artist's pencils, copy for America's leading journalist. Miles and miles of copy from such as Walter Winchell and Damon Runyon. The stuff of 1,000 headlines. Headlines for a world. But in America, whose national hero is Charles Lindbergh, the topic of the day, every day. On the street corner, in the subway, in the chairs in the barbershops. Is Hauptmann guilty or isn't he? The latter, specially made, and Hauptmann is a carpenter. The ransom notes, 13 in all, in a sprawling, half-literate hand. But the state contends it's the hand of Hauptmann. The word baby, used in a letter to a friend, compared with the same word in a ransom note. Worth studying. His hand-printed signature on his car license compared with the hand-printed name on a ransom note. A note signed B.H. Yes, the state mounts a strong case.
After examining the genuine handwriting of Hauptmann and the writing in the letters, there is no doubt, I believe, but this is the writer of the letters.
Is unmistakable. Mr. Hauptmann might just as well have signed each one of these ransom notes. So convincing to my mind is the proof that he did write them.
In my opinion, the fact is unmistakable that all 15 ransom notes were written by a man raised and educated in Germany. And that man is Bruno Richard Hauptmann.
Joseph Perrone, Bronx taxi man who delivered a ransom note, looks directly at Hauptmann and says, "That is the man." An 87-year-old German witness describes how he saw from his house near the Lindbergh home a car speed around the bend and nearly overturn. Its driver, the witness points. That is the man. Dr. Condon, Japsy, who told how he paid $50,000 ransom money to a man called John. That, says Japsy, is the man. On the stand, Hauptmann himself, caught up in a web of his own contradictions, undergoes ruthless cross-examination.
When you took that money from that shoebox down into that garage, and you took those gold certificates and put them in a basket, one after another, 5, 10s, and 20s, whatever they were, you didn't count it, did you? No. And you left it laying in a basket all night and you didn't count it, did you? You left it another night and you didn't count it. That's right. And the reason you didn't count it was because you knew, didn't you? I didn't know anything.
Under this barrage, he proves himself a many-time liar.
When you were arrested with this Lindbergh ransom money, you had a $20 bill. Lindbergh ransom money, did they ask you what you got? Did they ask you?
You did.
Did you lie to them or did you tell them the truth? Did you lie to them or did you tell them the truth?
I said nothing to him.
You lied, didn't you?
I did, yes.
To the jury, the state's case looks powerful indeed.
New Jersey has rested its case, convinced that it has clearly established that the defendant Hauptmann came to the state of New Jersey on the night of March the 1st, 1932, with the ladder which he built, placed that ladder against the wall of the Lindbergh home and went into the Lindbergh home and murdered the child.
So at Flemington, New Jersey, the jury considered their verdict. While a packed courtroom, a nation, a whole world waited for the decision.
The trial of the century had lasted 32 days. The English novelist Ford Madox Ford, reporting from the courthouse, believed an acquittal necessary. But he reflected there was too much class hatred in the world and the passion for bloodshed too keen for such an outcome. After 11 hours, the jury of 9 men and 4 women returned a unanimous decision.
They didn't have long to wait. The 13 came back. Men and women who at that moment seemed the most important people in the world, and no doubt felt that way. The verdict that the jury brought in, murder in the first degree, was one expected by the millions. Though there had been fumblings, errors, and delays, justice had at last been done. For poor Colonel Lindbergh and his wife, the agony was at last over. For Bruno Richard Hauptmann, the littlest of the tough guys, nothing left but execution and the dubious glamour of notoriety.
Well, I guess that's enough Manchender-Venza, is it? Just one more.
As a result of the media circus surrounding the Lindbergh trial, news cameras were banned from courthouses in all but 2 states of America, laws that would remain for over 40 years. Hauptmann never confessed and was sent to the electric chair on April the 3rd, 1936. But disquiet around the case continued. His wife Anna spent the rest of her life fighting to have the case reopened, but was never successful. By the time the Lindbergh trial ended, so had Prohibition. During those long, dry 13 years, support for the legalization of alcohol had grown as people became more aware of the widespread criminal activity caused by Prohibition. In 1933, with a new government in the White House, Congress passed the 21st Amendment, allowing once again the sale of intoxicating liquors.
Hoover has stepped down, and now Roosevelt is around to sign, among other documents, a bill permitting the sale of beer and wines. The final sting of gangsterdom is drawn with the end of Prohibition. In New York, the governor receives a present.
Governor Smith, Mr. Meyer. Stand on your Governor.
Aye. Real hand.
It's my privilege to deliver to you, with a compliment to Anheuser-Busch, the first case of Budweiser beer to be delivered in the state of New York. Happy days are here again.
Amid all the rejoicing, there is still voices raised in protest. One of the loudest among them, that of Billy Sunday, hot gospeler and self-styled reformer.
I'll fight the saloon from Hawaii to Hoboken. I'll kick it as long as I have a foot. I'll punch it as long as I have a fist. I'll butt it as long as I have a head. I'll bite it as long as I have a tooth. And when I'm old and fistless and footless and toothless, I'll gull it till I go home to heaven and it goes home, my friend, to hell.
Billy Sunday wasn't alone, and it wasn't until 1966 that alcohol became legal in all 50 states of America. Life was tough during the 30s, when some of the most notorious criminals in history ran rampage across America. Today, for the most part, their stories and the harsh times in which they lived are the stuff of myth and legend, consigned to the history books. But the media interest and our morbid fascination with criminals and crime, which flourished during those difficult years, lives on. Were they heroes or villains? Well, that's debatable.
The way to get these birds is to go after them like they go after you, with guns. The cops in any big city could clean up in a week if they used their nightsticks. But the people would howl and the yellow journals would have the police commissioners dumped in the ash can. And this stuff about gangsters being brave is a lot of bunk. They're all yellow. They're all afraid to be alone for a minute. Take it from me. I know. It don't pay in the long run.
Thus it is written, those who live by the gat shall in due course expire by the gat. And good riddance to them.